Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome back to the deep dive.
Yeah, welcome. This is where we take, well, a whole bunch of sources, commentary, research.
And really try to boil it down. We dig into the key ideas, maybe some surprising bits, and frankly, what it all means for you today.
Exactly. Cut through the noise, get you the essentials so you're informed, but hopefully not, overwhelmed.
And today we're going way back, ancient history, but the lessons, they feel really now.
hmm Our source material is mostly drawn from commentary on Ezra chapter 3. We'll just call it MCS as we talk through its ideas.
We're diving into, well, a huge moment for the people of Israel. They're coming back from exile.
And starting to rebuild Jerusalem. Specifically, we're looking at the altar and the temple foundation in this chapter.
Right. And it's more than just history, isn't it? It's really a story about community, faith, facing challenges.
And just the reality, often the messy reality, of trying to build something important together.
So our goal here is to pull out those timeless lessons, looking through the lens of this specific commentary on Ezra 3.
Let's set the scene then. Ezra 3, verse 1. The people are back from Babylon after, well, decades.
They've settled back into their old towns, which must have been a massive adjustment itself. But then something shifts.
Yeah, the text says, when the 7th month arrived, that's Tishrei, a really key month in their calendar, lots of important feasts.
And what happens, it says they all gather together in Jerusalem, like as one person.
The source points out this probably wasn't just, spontaneous. The prophet Haggai had apparently been active just before this.
Ah, right. Challenging the leaders, telling people, hey, stop focusing only on your own fancy houses.
And prioritize God's house. So this gathering, it had this sense of urgency, maybe a divine push behind it.
So they're all together in Jerusalem. What's the absolute first thing they do? It's pretty striking in verses 2 through 6.
The altar. Before anything else, they rebuild the altar of the God of Israel.
Led by the key figures, Yeshua the priest and Zerubbabel the governor, spiritual and civil leadership working together.
And their aim was clear, wasn't it? To get back to offering burnt offerings, just like the Torah, the law of Moses, commanded.
And the commentary we're using mentions that Ezra keeps it brief here. If you look at Nehemiah 8, you see this context where Ezra reads the law aloud.
And then this action, building the altar, is them putting that word into practice immediately. They heard it, they did it.
Okay, so the altar, the commentary offers this interpretation that the altar itself is like a picture prefiguring Jesus Christ.
Right. Back then, the altar was the meeting place between God and his people, where sin was dealt with through sacrifice. It represents that vital connection point.
Which kind of brings us a lesson for today, doesn't it? If the altar is that meeting place.
Then rebuilding it first really highlights how crucial it is to gather, together as God's people for worship. It's fundamental.
Totally. And look at verse 3. It says they set it up on its former bases.
They weren't trying to be innovative. They were going back to the original foundation, the established way.
But then there's this crucial detail. They did this even though they felt threatened by the people already living in the land around them.
Yeah, that's huge. Getting back on track with God didn't make their problems vanish. If anything, it stirred up opposition.
But here's the thing, that fear, that threat, it didn't stop them. They kept going with the work, with the worship.
And the commentary draws a direct line to us now. If you're really trying to follow God's purposes, maybe restoring something spiritually, don't be shocked if you face pushback.
Right. It might not mean you're wrong. It could actually mean you're hitting on something important. The call is just to keep going, like they did.
So altars up, they're facing opposition. What next?
They worship. Verses 4 to 6 show they immediately jump back into the rhythm of the feasts. They observe Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles.
Exactly as written in the law. Daily sacrifices, regular offerings, new moon offerings, offerings for all the appointed times.
Plus free will offerings. It was like a full reboot of their worship life.
But what's really fascinating, the commentary highlights this from verse 6, is the timing.
Yeah, get this. They started offering these sacrifices from the very first day of that 7th month.
Even though the foundation of the actual temple building hadn't been laid yet.
Wow. Think about that. The worship, the feasts, started before the building was even begun.
The source sees this as like a prophetic picture. It points forward to Jesus, who is the ultimate sacrifice, the one who fulfilled all those offerings.
He is our real meeting place with God now, right? Not a building, but in our hearts.
Exactly. So the takeaway kind of challenges us if we get too caught up in needing the perfect building, the fancy setup, before we can truly worship.
This story powerfully reminds us real worship is about obedience, about connecting with God, doing what he says no matter the circumstances, even without the four walls.
Okay, so moving on from the altar and that initial worship, verses 7 to 9 get practical. They need materials, they need workers for the bigger project.
Right, so money changes hands. They pay stoneworkers, carpenters.
And they provide supplies, food, drink, olive oil to the people from Sidon and Tyre.
These were likely non-Israelite craftsmen, the Phoenicians, known for their skill, especially with timber.
And the purpose was specific. Get those big cedar logs from Lebanon, bring them down to the coast, ship them to Joppa, there's Jaffa today.
All under the authorization King Cyrus had given them way back in chapter 1. Logistics, resources, it was a big undertaking.
And the commentary suggests that this giving, paying the workers, providing supplies, was actually another form of worship.
Oh, interesting. So worship wasn't just at the altar. It flowed into how they used their resources, their finances to support God's work.
Yeah. And there's this neat connection the source draws too. Paying carpenters. Well, it reminds us Jesus himself was a carpenter.
So just like these guys were rebuilding the physical temple.
Jesus in the New Testament is described as building the true temple, the church, his people and human hearts.
That really reframes giving, doesn't it? It's not just, covering costs. It's participating in God's building project, physically and spiritually.
So the actual work on the temple starts, according to verses 8 and 9, in the second year after they got back, in the second month.
The leadership team kicks things off officially. Zerubbabel, Yeshua, their families, the priests, the Levites who'd returned.
And they organize the workforce. Specifically, Levites aged 20 and up are appointed to direct the work on the house of Adonai.
Adonai, that's Lord.
Right. And the commentary points out something interesting here. God's own people, the Levites, were mainly the supervisors, the directors, not necessarily all the hands-on laborers or craftsmen.
Which leads to a point the source makes. It kind of challenges the idea that God only uses believers for his work.
Remember those Sidonians and Tyrians getting supplies? Non-Israelites, lost people in that sense, were involved in the essential physical building.
So the principle being drawn is?
That involving people who maybe don't yet follow Jesus and serving alongside believers. It's powerful. As they work together, they see faith lived out, they hear the message.
And it opens a door for them to potentially come to faith themselves. It's like God uses everyone in his big plan, creating chances for witness.
Okay, now we get to a really dramatic moment in verses 10 through 13, the laying of the temple foundation.
This was huge. The first solid step towards seeing the temple rise again after being rubble for so long.
And the reaction, it was intense. The text gives this vivid scene. Priests in robes with trumpets.
Levites from Asaph's line, the musicians with cymbals, taking their proper places to praise Adonai, following King David's old arrangements.
And they're singing back and forth, antiphonally praising and thanking God. And they sing that core refrain, "For he is good, for his grace continues forever toward Israel."
Beautiful. And the crowd's reaction, verse 11 says basically everyone let out this massive shout of praise because the foundation was finally laid. Pure joy, right?
Mostly. But then verse 12 hits you with this contrast. Many of the older people, priests, Levites, leaders who were old enough to actually remember the first temple, Solomon's temple.
Oh, wow. What did they do?
When they saw the foundation of this new, likely much smaller, humbler temple, they wept loudly.
So you've got weeping. But what about the others?
The others, probably the younger generation who only knew exile or ruins, they were shouting for joy just as loudly.
So you have this incredible sound clash described in verse 13. The noise was so mixed, so loud, you couldn't tell the weeping from the shouting.
And the joyful shouts were so huge, they could be heard from far away. Just this overwhelming wave of sound and emotion.
So what's the commentary say this means, this collision of weeping and shouting?
It interprets it as the younger folks rightly celebrating God doing something new, the hope returning. While the older generation were genuinely mourning what was lost, the glory, the history of that first temple, it was a real grief.
And the application drawn is pretty relevant for churches or any community going through change today, isn't it?
Absolutely. Sometimes that deep love for the past, for the old ways, even if it's well-intentioned, can make it hard to fully embrace and celebrate what God is doing now. It can cause friction.
Okay, so let's try and pull these threads together from Ezra 3 based on the source commentary.
Yeah, first off, the absolute priority of gathering God's people for worship centered on the altar, which points us to Jesus, our true meeting place.
And then the reality that doing God's work often brings opposition, but that's not a reason to stop. It's a call to persevere.
We also saw giving financial practical support isn't just admin. It's a real act of worship that fuels God's building work.
And that surprising insight about God using everyone, including those who don't yet believe, creating opportunities for witness as people serve together.
And finally, that really human moment at the foundation. Joy and grief side by side. Celebrating the new while mourning the past, and the challenge that brings.
So maybe take a second now and think, why does this story from, thousands of years ago matter to you?
How do these themes worship first perseverance, generous giving, including everyone, navigating that tension between past and present? How do they play out in your life?
In your community, maybe your church. Is the focus really on the altar, on Jesus? How do you react to opposition?
Do you see your giving as worship? Are you looking for ways to involve others, creating space for them to encounter God?
And how do you handle those times when excitement for the new runs up against nostalgia or even grief for what was?
That scene at the foundation, it's just so raw, weeping and shouting all mixed together.
It wasn't neat. It wasn't one or the other. It was both happening at the same time.
So here's a final thought to chew on from this deep dive. How can we, you, me, our communities, how can we genuinely honor the past, learn from it, value it?
But without letting its memory, however precious, kind of drown out the joy and the celebration of what God is actually doing right now in front of us.
How do we make room for both? For maybe the tear that remembers alongside the shout that embraces the future God is building?